Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I am honored to have Dan Young with me. Dan is the founder and CEO of PC Laptop Computers and the Ugly Unicorn Hedge Fund. And one of his mantras, which I think you're going to hear throughout the conversation today, is don't ask and then not do or use. So, Dan, thanks so much for being on today, man.
Thanks for having me on, man. Excited.
You betcha. So to kick off your story, your parents escaped China and come to the United States. So talk a little bit about growing up in a household that has that type of a background.
Yeah, it's very interesting. They grew up in China before the communist occupation and all that, and they did really well when they were younger. The family did really well. They were very wealthy and well-to-do. Then the war started, and they lost everything. I mean, went from living in a castle to homeless, right? And so it was a big change
Uh,
for them. And so luckily, they were able to immigrate to the United States and learn how to speak English and clean floors and become janitors, stuff like that. Terrible stuff, but worked hard and then did okay from there. And they were able to have me, my brother and sister, and so we
yeah.
were able to learn a little bit from their experience.
Absolutely. Now, as you were growing up, you kind of adopted that hard work mentality and, hey, whatever I got to do to make some money. And so sunglasses and shirts on the beach became the business model. So talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial bug and getting started for you.
Yeah, so really, it was just more for fun. I like the beach, right?
Yeah.
Everyone likes the beach. Everyone likes to have a few drinks and then, wear cool sunglasses. So some friends and I started selling these sunglasses and t-shirts at the beach. And we would go up to people with our little mirror and be like, hey, you need some sunglasses? And yeah, because it was really bright, sun was bright. And we would sell them. We'd say, you can get two pairs for this discount, or you can get three pairs for this. Hey, your girlfriend needs some, and it was cool. The wonderful thing about it is, young men that we were, we got to hang out with a lot of the girls from school. They'd come out, we'd give them a free set of sunglasses, buy them some food, drinks, good old social time on the beach, go surfing.
Yeah.
It was great. And, sometimes we'd make over $1,000 a day. We had one day we made like over $2,000. And this is a bunch of teenagers.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, you couldn't ask for more fun.
Absolutely. Now, as you're growing up, eventually you get to a spot where you move to Utah, and that is just kind of a tough phase of life. So talk a little bit about some of the things that you're learning in that season and what's going on there.
Yeah. So as I continued my career as a teenager in California, I got in trouble because we started partying too much and ended up going to juvenile hall for a little bit. It's the bad place for kids, right?
Yeah.
But when I got out, my parents were like, "You need to get out of here. You're hanging around the rowdy friends. You guys are just partying too much." So I moved to Utah. My sister took me in, and I lived there for a little bit. Got a job out here selling um, carpet cleaning. Tried that. Did pretty good at that on the phone telemarketing. Used car sales, and then finally got into selling electronics,
Yes.
computers and electronics. So the big company I worked for, they went out of business that I was selling electronics for, and so they had a database of all the computers I had sold while I was there. And I asked my manager, I'm like, "Can I get that list?" So this is before cell phones were
Yes.
most people had them, right? So I had a pager, and so I started calling these people, like just dialing them, and said, "Hey, if you have a warranty, I'll honor your warranty." And we honored the warranty. The next year, we did over $1 million in rev. So
So I want
crazy
to
journey.
highlight,
Yeah.
well, I want to highlight that, but I want you to, before you get to the next year, talk about the first year, because if I knew it was going to work and I'd make $1 million the next year, or there would be $1 million of revenue the next year, no brainer. Everyone would do it. But you had a painful first year.
Yeah, I lost over 20,000, in the red, just honoring warranties and parts and things. It was crazy, but people were great about reciprocating. The one caveat is when I fixed their computer, I'd put a sticker on it with my pager number, and I'm like,
Mm,
if you need anything. And so people just started calling me, "I need upgrades, I need new computers," and it worked out.
yeah. Now, so let's dive into that. I'm curious here. So, for somebody who is starting a business. I think so many times people want to have all of the answers, right? Or they want to have this really well dialed in plan, which you should, but the reality is you're never going to have it all perfectly, right? Sometimes you just have to jump in. So talk a little bit about, your willingness to just jump into the opportunity, even though you didn't know exactly how it would work out, right? Your faith was just that, hey, I think it's a wise enough choice that at some point this will work for me.
Rephrase that question. Sorry. What was it?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you had the willingness to jump into a business, even though it had, I mean, some part of the business had just failed, right? So you're taking over
Right.
a business that wasn't working for some reason. And even though you didn't necessarily have this perfectly dialed in plan, you had the willingness to jump in. And someone listening is probably thinking, gosh, I've got an idea, but I don't know if it's the exact right thing. Maybe I'll wait until it is right.
Okay. So really, the big one was mentors. So while I was selling electronics, I met one of my earliest mentors, and he framed it out for me from previous experience. And that's the one big thing is mentors. A lot of people won't ask for help, and I think asking for help is critical. Obviously, should be reciprocal. If your mentor needs help with like their charity, their projects, volunteer, just someone to talk to, be there for them for all those circumstances. I think that's hypercritical, but you can avoid a lot of landmines by talking to mentors, especially older people, to help guide you through it. People have already been through it. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I don't think most business is business. Most of it's not all that original. It's just being consistent and building processes and executing and not giving up when you're getting smashed in the teeth. And getting smashed in the teeth is like so common. I was speaking to my CFO actually right before this podcast, and she's like, "We got to deal with this. We got to deal with this. We're selling too much here, so we got to raise more money here." And it's just like, wow. And she's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm fine. Just let's size it up and we'll chunk it down. And we have good problems, so uh, let's just get them fixed." And then she's like, "Right on." So really, it's just important though. Again, and if there's something that you have not dealt with before, you want to use what's called the 1, 2, 3 rule. And how that works is you go to your mentor, who's an expert in that area. And if it's something you haven't experienced before, you ask them, "Well, what do I do?" And they'll be like, "This is what I'd recommend," right? The second time you experience something with a little variant, just verify, "Hey, last time you told me to do this is a little bit different, but will this work?" And then the third time you can usually go autonomous where you've learned,
Mhm.
and then you can start mentoring other people on it too. So 1, 2, 3 rules, super critical.
I love it. Now,
Mm.
for you, you hinted at it. You developed this relationship with a mentor, which I love how it comes to be. You're working and you help fix one of his electronics, and he had sold a business. So, how did you pursue that person? I think to what you were saying earlier. As the mentee, you want to be supportive of the mentor, whatever it is that they need, because they're giving you a lot of value. But there's certain things you can do to give value back to them as well. So talk a little bit about how you went about pursuing that relationship at that time.
So with this mentor, he had a broken ham radio, and I was, selling electronics, and so I just fixed it. It was a fuse, and then he's like, "What are you?" I'm like, "Nothing, man." And he's like, "Dude, do you have a mentor? You're such a good kid." And I'm like, "No." He's like, "Well, let's grab some lunch, and maybe I can give you some pointers." I'm okay. At least I can do is buy you lunch. So
Yeah.
got to know him and found out that he sold his company for over $1 billion. And he was retired. And I'm like, "Oh wow, this is like a privilege."
Yeah.
Um, and what's funny, within 3 years of meeting this mentor, I actually had a net worth of over $1 million, which is crazy from like 27,000 in debt. So it was worth it, to just be nice, fix his radio. But another thing you can do for most people, I get so many messages on Instagram, "Hey, can I pick your brain?" I hate that. Like,
Yeah.
no, you can't pick my brain. It's $10,000 an hour. Let's go if you want. Wire it
Yeah.
over. But if there's a problem that I have, one of them, this guy, Kyle Deaver, he always likes to get a shout out. But this guy, Kyle, I'm like, he goes, "How can I help you, man? Hey, I saw that your daughter is an entrepreneur. She opened an art store online at Etsy, and you're always tagging her. How can I support you? I mean, can I support your daughter? Is that cool with you?
Yeah.
Um, and so he's like, my daughter's like, "Dude, someone just wired me. I mean, they sent like Venmoed me $1,000 to me to pick some whatever sculptures to give out to people as gifts. And I'm like,
Cool.
wow. And so this guy, Kyle, I called him up, talked to him for like 2 hours,
Yeah.
sent him a private invite to our event, got to hang out with all the ballers. And he's like, man, that was good ROI. I'm like, well, you're the one who was generous and see what I needed. I wanted to
Yes.
see my daughter be supported, man. And no one, well, not no one else, but no one else is that generous, And I was like, that's a good hearted human.
Right.
So a lot of people just want to take, and don't listen to
Mm.
what everyone's got needs, right? Everyone cares about their children and their families and their coworkers. And, there's always ways to help. Charity.
Yes. I
Yeah.
love that. That's an amazing
Mm.
story. Now, the second thing that you mentioned was kind of that 3-year, we'll call it launching pad, right? You went from 27,000 in debt to a net worth of over 1 million. So there's clearly some radical changes and different life choices that you make in that 3-year time frame. So talk a little bit about some of the advice that you were given, but then also your willingness to take that advice. I think that can be the barrier. And that's why I love, that comment earlier that I made just about how you don't just ask for advice and then not use it. If you're going to ask for it, then use that advice.
Yeah. So the big one was with him is like, look, you can make more money and you can invest wisely. You can keep your expenses low. I mean, this is all very basic stuff. So I'm like, okay, how can I make more money? Well, I could sell more stuff, right? So
Yeah.
really, I hired salespeople, you know, and I was generous with the commissions. And this is back in the early '90s, and some of my salespeople were making six figures their first year, which was a lot back in the early '90s,
Yeah.
right? Like that's good money. Um, some of them I gave a little bit of equity percentage, if they're really good to bring in other salespeople,
Yep.
hire a bunch of technicians. With my investing though, the big one was he said, look, real estate is probably going to be one of your core. It's going to be a little bit harder to get into it up front because down payments, but you should buy some stocks. He was recommending at the time Microsoft, Amazon, stuff like that. And so I was buying some of these stocks. He showed me that buying a primary residence was kind of stupid. So
Mhm.
he's like, at least buy a duplex or something, that way you can help offset the mortgage payment. So I'm like, okay, I'll do that. There was no Bitcoins back then,
Yeah.
right? um, so that's what I continue to do. And he's like, make it a goal to buy, a property a year at least, and continue to dollar cost average every month invest.
Mhm.
So that's what I did. I got pretty lucky with like Microsoft. That was really cool.
Yeah.
And one of the duplexes I remember I bought is this duplex. It was 57 grand, 2-year hold, sold it for 179, which was great. Then bought
Yeah.
some other property, multifamily, and you know, and he was the guy. He was like, "Here's my spreadsheet, and this is how you calculate, how to do it." There's a book called Cash Flow Forever. If
Mm.
if you want to understand real estate, it's the most boring book in the universe. So dry, but it gives you all the formulas of how to win at real estate. Because usually, most of real estate is a mathematical calculation. It's
Right.
not. I love it. It just feels right, man. Whatever, like math, right?
Yeah.
You got to figure
Well,
out your cap rates, your net operating income, cost segregation. You got to do all this good stuff.
yeah. So talk about that. I think there's so much emotion that can tarnish our decision-making ability, right? We let emotion play into it, and sometimes that causes us to make a radical decision that we wouldn't have normally made, but in the heat of a moment, we do that. And I mean, you've been a business owner, you've been in real estate, you're an investor. There's a lot of emotions that come into those, and typically, following your emotion can lead to poor decisions. Following your predetermined ideas or your logic beforehand can help make really wise choices. So talk a little bit about that in your life today.
Managing emotions, is that
Yeah.
looking at?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, really, you eat an elephant by breaking it down to little chunks, right? Little
Yeah.
bite-sized chunks. And most problems you can solve. Uh, you just got to think clearly about how to do it again and talk to mentors and not freak out too much about it. Um, there's a system process really for solving most things. Um, and a lot of people begin, they just want to react instead of respond.
Mm.
And when you do that, it tends to get really bad. Uh, I think the most important thing is take personal responsibility and learn from these mistakes as you make them. over the year. Because if you're repeating the same mistakes, then you have an issue. Life seems to always give you fresh new problems every year, right? Every month. It's like, is there more? And the answer is yeah. I've experienced a lot of problems, a lot of triumphs, and I think there's a lot more to go. But problems are a sign of life, and how you deal with them as a challenge. I think that's the key. There's one word that I don't use, and that's the word frustrated. Frustrated is taking your hands off the steering wheel and hoping that you're hitting an ice patch in the snow or whatever, and you're going out of control. Take your hands off the wheel, you're probably going to go off that cliff. So you just got to be calm, keep your hands on the wheel, and usually you're going to live. Doesn't mean your car's not going to get banged up, but you'll probably make it.
Absolutely. I love that. So once again, to go back to the PC laptops business and kind of growing that, you mentioned, year one was a little bit tough, but year two revenues were really great. So talk a bit about scaling and growing that business from, getting that, list or database from people to making it a sustainable and growing business.
So system processes are important though. So I usually segment things down, but first it's important to have a good team of mentors or at least experts, So usually you'll want a killer tax person, right?
Yeah.
That's important though, because you got to understand your finances, and your tax person actually ends up teaching you a lot about how finances work. It's
Yeah.
important to have a good banker, an insurance person, a great attorney for general counsel. You just want to have experts to go to at every facet of your business. That way, you're not home brewing it yourself. Some people think, well, I can just Google how to do it. And that's how you're going to go to jail.
Yeah.
Yeah, like don't do it yourself. Whether it's legal work or taxes, like don't homebrew that. Like just pay the money. Someone who has a good reputation, let them solve it for you. It actually will make you money more in the long term. Okay. I wouldn't cut corners there,
Yes.
It's crazy. But also start writing down your system processes and then scaling. You really need to nail it before you scale it. Not perfect, but pretty darn good, so that the flow is good as far as net profit. Is your costs are under control, your revenue line's good, your salespeople's trading processes, measuring mathematically,
Yeah.
close ratios, conversions, all that kind of stuff. I think the biggest thing that a lot of people don't get is marketing, though. Marketing is hypercritical. I sat down with my friend Brent, who was the vice president of AT&T for many years, decades, and in charge of sales. And he said, look, it's usually either a traffic problem or a closing problem, right? For sales. It's like, you don't have enough traffic, people aren't closing, or your website's not converting. So you really got to separately address those two things. And marketing loves to blame salespeople, and salespeople love to blame marketing. The whole idea is try to bring that team together as a harmonious unit, and everyone could just own their area together, because it's a team win. That's how you scale, and then that's how we got our third company is Xidax, Xidax, where we sell high performance gaming computers.
Yeah.
And that company now is much larger than PC laptops. It's huge. And that ugly unicorn, our crypto hedge fund, that's kind of like my newest iteration, and it's phenomenal. That's something that's kind of geared towards the future, blockchain and AI and all that kind of stuff. So it's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun.
So how did the Xidax business come to be as a kind of a separate business from what you're already doing in the PC laptop space?
Well, PC laptops is brick and mortar.
Yeah.
And so I'm a mentor guy. Tell me, he's like, hey man, why don't you just get out of Utah? And I'm like, okay, we'll open PC laptops in Vegas. And he's like, well, why did you get out of Utah and Vegas? I'm like, how do I do that? He goes, online. I'm like, duh. So I had a friend who has a company like 10 times bigger than Xidax. And he said he needed help with social media. So I helped him, showed him how to, I got him from like 0 Facebook followers to 30,000 in like 3 months. So he was like, wow, that's great. This is back in 2008, right?
Yeah.
And so he's like, I'll show you how to start a gaming company online. So he just spelled it out, took me on a factory tour, and showed me how to do it. So turned out pretty good for us at Xidax. So Xidax now, If you play any video games or watch a movie, there's a good chance it was made on one of our computers as well.
How amazing. I love that. Now, mentors continue to be an important piece of your life. And you mentioned, there was a second mentor that has really stood out. And I believe it was his son was going through a tough point in life. And you were there to kind of help be a mentor to his son and help him there. And that opened up the opportunity for the two of you to connect. So, talk a little bit about, once again, that relationship and just being willing to give before you're just expecting to get something.
That scenario actually happened with a couple of my mentors, where a lot of times they were kind of workaholic and they didn't have good relationships with their children because they're so busy trying to make money and build their
Right.
empires. And so, again, they just asked me some of my advice on what I would do, and I'm like, well, bring them to work with you, teach them the trade, teach them the
Mm,
craft. Don't force them, but just teach them how fun it can be,
yeah.
and then they'll start really respecting it because they can see that, that you're actually just an amazing person. A lot of times people take dad or mom for granted,
Right.
but when they see them in the battlefield getting hit and fighting back and winning, and then they can learn to pick up a sword, that builds their confidence more than anything. It's like monkey see, monkey do. You got
Yeah.
to teach your kids. They're gonna just mirror you. So
Mm,
it's weird how people try to sometimes shelter their children and just give them money or a good life and not teach them the tools they need. But I think nothing beats taking them out and showing them what you do by example with integrity, and with energy, with
yeah.
intelligence. And then they'll start mirroring those traits. And so I've had a couple of mentors and they just started doing that and they started falling together with their relationships, started getting really strong with their kids. So that's great. Now their kids want to run their empires, which is great because we're all getting old.
Yeah. So thinking about that, I think that's one of the tough balances of life, right? Is when people have career desired success and when they have a family or, people they care about, it's that constant kind of balancing act of how do I make sure that I'm giving time and attention to spouse and children to make sure that there's a healthy relationship there. All the while, I still want to grow and scale my business or, whatever it is to the next level. So talk a
Mm.
bit about, once again, I know you gave that really good practical example of, hey, have your kids come with you, have them see what you do. But what are some other things that you've done in your life to make sure that those relationships are staying healthy all the while the business is growing and, beneficial for you as well?
So what I do is I schedule it. Okay, um, I'll give you an example of when my kids were little. Those of you that have little kids, my daughter was like 5 or 6 or something like that, right? And my son was like a teenager. And we were at Disneyland, and we're going on Space Mountain, and my phone starts blowing up. Oh my gosh, we got this major fire at the office. It's going to cost us $1 million. This is freaking nuts. And so I just take a deep breath, try to be calm. And I look at my wife. She goes, "What?" I'm like, "Hey kids, do you guys want some ice cream from the future?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, but the line's so long." Like, tell you what, you guys go ride Space Mountain. I'm gonna stand in line for ice cream. Okay. And as soon as you get off, I'm gonna have ice cold ice cream waiting for you. And they're like, "You
Mm.
would do that, Dad?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I've ridden this ride a million times. I know you guys. It's really hot out here." So I got in line to the ice cream stand and was there for like I don't know an hour or something. And I was handling this fire, right? And by the
Yeah.
time I got up to the front, the fire was solved. Got the ice cream. Kids came off, and they're like, "You're the best dad ever," right?
Mm.
Gave them the ice cream. They're like, "I can't believe you stood in line just for us, Dad." They're like, "Wow." So I told my kids actually what happened a couple of years ago, and they're like, "Oh, you're so smart, Dad." I'm like, "Well, obviously, I just wanted to make the experience good for you guys, but I also needed to handle business. But I
Yeah.
didn't want to make it feel like I was taking something from you guys. So just a little time allocation." So now my daughter actually just texted me as we were on this podcast. She's like, "Hey, you want to grab some lunch?"
Yeah.
So I do daddy daughter day. She's an adult now, 21, going to be 22. She has her own business, right?
Yeah.
Online. And so I meet with her about every week and we go over her business problems, her boyfriend problems, whatever. She can just vent and I'll be like, I can mentor, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, "This is the greatest thing." Her mother said to me, my wife said to me, "Whoa, like you spend more time with both of our kids now than I do." And I go,
Mm.
"Well, this is the point in time where I can share my experience because they're running businesses now, and
Yeah.
I'm good at that." I go, "I wasn't maybe the best Disneyland dad." She goes, "Actually, you were great. You got him the ice cream." I'm like, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's just
Yeah.
schedule it. Schedule
Mm.
time with your children, with your wife, date night every week. Like just make that it's just like a meeting, except
Yep.
while you're there, be focused. Don't be staring at your phone, put it in
Yep.
airplane mode, eat the sushi together, talk about life, and if you're a man, just freaking listen. Don't try to solve all
Mm.
your wife's problems. Listen. And if they want a solution out of you, don't say, so what do you think I should do?
Yeah.
Then like, but don't just like be all controlling and like a boss. That was my
Yeah.
biggest mistake, is trying to like solve everyone's problems.
Mm.
Especially very hard on wives' brains, because a lot of times they just want to be heard and they already know what they're going to do.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and
Crazy.
I think that reiterates what you were saying earlier of, respond, don't just react, right? And then I just love how intentional you are with what you're doing, right? Intentional with your time, intentional with your connections, and making sure that the people you care about most are tended to.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2014, then a university professor and yourself are talking, and they say, "Hey, maybe you should think about doing this mining of cryptocurrency." And you say, "Sure." So talk a little about kind of the research that you did to open up that piece of the business and to grow that.
Yeah, so we sell computers. So this professor comes in and he's like, "Hey, you want to see something cool?" And I'm like, "Okay." So he has this hard key, this like ledger key type of thing.
Yeah,
And he's like, "Check that out. You know what that number is?" And I'm like, "What's that?" He goes, "It's how many Bitcoins I have, 9,724." I'm like, "What's Bitcoin, bro?" And he's like, "Well, you can use your computers, you can make them." And I'm like, "Oh." He's like, "I want to buy 10 computers for my students, and so we can show them how to make them." I'm like, "Cool, man." He's like, "You don't even have to give me a good deal." He's like, "I'm just gonna buy it." I'm like, "Okay, crazy dude." So
yeah,
I build it for him, and he's like, "I'm gonna give you a gift." I'm like, "Okay." See this USB key? It has a mining script on it. All you gotta do is take those computers I built, plug it in the USB, turn it on, and it's gonna mine Bitcoins for you. I'm like, "Okay," because I highly encourage you to build a lot of these. Um, so I built 4,000 miners. so, uh, and we just started pumping out crypto. Uh, it was kind of crazy because every year he would come in and buy computers just for students and grandkids, and that drove
yeah.
a beat up old rusty truck. He had, this is in 2017. He came to visit me at $178 million.
Mm.
And he would show me this on his little ledger key.
Yeah,
I got $178 million. I'm like, "You still teaching?" He's like, "I'm retired now, but I still love my truck." And he's
yeah,
crazy, dude. But that's the guy who got me into that. So we built the biggest Bitcoin mining facility in Utah back in
yeah,
14. Um, it wasn't like, crazy, 1,000 acres or something like that. But I mean, it was like pretty substantial for its time. And it did really well. And it was crazy because I continued to build miners and sell them to friends who had businesses. One of my friends owned a coffee shop, and his name's Ryan, and he lost he was mining Dogecoin. He goes, "What's the most highest paying coin?" And it was Dogecoin at the time in 14, 15.
yeah,
And so he lost his password, but he had his actual wallet key still. So he's like, "Dude, do you know my password?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, "Why would I know your password?" He's like, "Check your iMessages." So I scroll back.
yeah.
He texted me the password. And he's like, I gave it to him, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, you know how much money is there? This is crazy." So I made this video. "You've changed my life. This is like," so it was a happy story to see so many of those type of stories. There's still two or three guys that didn't text me. I tell people, don't text me your password. But there's two or three guys
Yeah.
who actually forgot their password.
I know.
Did you know there's like 6 million Bitcoin that are lost that people don't know the password to?
Right. Isn't that crazy?
6 million, and there's only 21 million that can be mined, right? So that's like
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love it. So as that grew and you had success with that, you decided to kind of look into different types of real estate from there and get into, commercial or different types of investment property. So talk a little bit about the transition from that type of an asset to the real estate and, what you looked for when you're making your real estate purchases.
All right. So the big thing is cap rates. right? Earning a good return every year. That was a big one. Some of the properties are just have turned out to be really good. The ones that I acquired in 16, 17 in that range,
Yeah.
During the downturn and during COVID, for a short window there was some really good discounting,
Mm.
and then it kind of went up way high,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I bought 10 duplexes during that super blip because the developer ran out of money. He was scared and stuff. So, but with real estate, the big thing I think is just doing mathematics. You want to see how much rent you're collecting, what your debt service is, how much your maintenance is going to be, your property taxes, and of course, talk to your CPA, right, about how you can depreciate it correctly.
Yep.
And usually it all makes sense, right? At the end
Yeah.
of the day, it probably makes sense. And I would never go like all in on real estate, meaning like don't be over leveraged,
Yep.
meaning get in with too little down payment where you're barely be able to make that. Because if you have a lot of vacancy, empty spaces, and you still got to service that debt, that's gonna be real scary if you don't have a lot of cash.
Yes.
A lot of people are experiencing that right now.
Yeah.
Especially a lot of my friends. This is scary. They built a lot of commercial developments and did short-term adjustable rate mortgages that had 3-year expirations.
Yep.
And now it doesn't make sense. Now they're collecting this much rent, and their debt service, the payment's going to go up like this, so they're upside down, so they're going to lose it.
Right.
It's and I think it's just beginning. I think the next year is going to be bloody, very bloody for everybody. I mean, not everybody, but it's going to be tougher. But the opportunities will be there too if you have cash.
Absolutely. So as you talk about, your life, I think one of the most important things that I'm hearing is, the mentorship, but then inside of businesses, outside of mentors, have you ever done partnerships, or have you always tried to kind of keep yourself at the helm of it? So there's, less hands trying to mingle in on the ownership side and you can kind of be the one steering the ship? Or have you gotten to a point where you're like, I want to delegate and have a equal owner with me, so that way there's someone along the journey that's equally as invested into these ventures as I am?
Yeah. So typically with most of my real estate projects, I've just soloed them.
Mm-hmm.
Now for my computer companies, I have one partner, and actually he's an employee. He had to prove himself, worked for me for a decade, right? To show
Yeah.
that he wasn't just in and
Yeah.
out, right? And then what I do is I have it vest, so every year he gets a little bit more based
Mm-hmm.
on that performance, and so I think that's a good thing. My hedge fund that I started with Bridger Pennington, we're just 50-50. And he's great, does all the compliance and all the legal and all the tax stuff and works with all that. And I actually manage portfolios and I sell, right? Bring money in. So great partnership there. And he's been a joy to work with. So, but one rule is I would probably never have more than one major partner, though. Too many of them just start ganging up on each other. It becomes messy.
Absolutely. Now, inside of, all the different businesses you run, there's certain things that a person does really well. There's certain things that you learn to partner and delegate with. But I think for some people, some of folks' growth is limited by their inability or lack of willingness to delegate, or lack of willingness to trust somebody else to run in a lane that maybe I'm not great at, but you are great at, right? So talk a little bit about, either hiring to your weaknesses so you can focus on your strengths, or being willing to take a little of your ego out so that way you can see the ultimate vision of what's possible.
I would say, it's all about track record,
Yeah.
and then making sure whoever it is has integrity, intelligence, and energy. One thing that I do is if I put someone in place, just for example, if I have a CFO, I'll have a third party audit, right?
Mm.
Just to go over the books and make sure things are good, because one human being is going to make mistakes sometimes, and so having a third party audit helps kind of lessen that chance.
Yeah.
I've had processes internally that I had third party audit on and still got missed. So like nothing is guaranteed. That's why I think what I do, for example, with my CPA tax attorneys, is I make them walk me through every single line of my tax return for every one of my companies. It's like a 2-day process. It's expensive,
Yeah.
but the thing is, I understand everything on there.
Right.
That's great education, because at the end of the day, whatever you do as the owner, you sign it, and if you
Yep.
sign it, you're responsible for it.
That's right.
So I think you shouldn't play ignorant. I know some people that say, "Oh, I just focus on sales or just focus on marketing," but they ignore everything else and they're ignorant to it. And then a lot of stuff happens and they find out about it later, and it's a problem. So it doesn't mean you need to micromanage. You just need to understand.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, I want to say thanks so much for you highlighting your story and just the pivotal moments. I mean, I love everything about it, from the early days and getting started to finding mentors to taking risks and just how it's played out. And excited to continue to watch your story and can't wait to do this again in a couple of years and highlight some of the, pivotal moments that have led you at that point. Where can people find you on different social platforms so they can make sure to follow?
I would go to Instagram at Dan Millionaire Code. It's been blue checked for a while, but now people can buy a blue check, right? But the blue check I think is important, even if people need to buy it now to verify their identity, because there's so many fraud accounts, and hopefully with the new thing where some different people who didn't have it can buy it, it actually is true identity verification. We will see how that works out. But yeah, that's the best place, and it's got links to everything there. So.
I love it. Well, Dan, thanks again so much for the time today, man. Excited to follow up with you and keep watching your journey.
All right. Thanks, man.